In a shabby alley under a torrential rain, our main character is having an entrance that couldn't be more pathetic. As soon as he woke up, the first thing he noticed was a strange green vapor rising from his hand. A headache struck like a hammer. It seemed the operating system of this new body was rebooting and encountering some glitches. And here it comes, the classic line of every young man after being transferred to another world echoed. Where am I? Wait, he began to dig through his memories and realized something illogical. He should have been checking the King of Hell's emails at this time. Right. And here's a brief CV for those who don't know. His name is Jean Quan, a former Special Forces member, specialized in handling intense action scenes. The story is, during a seemingly routine mission, he and his teammates fell straight into a trap that had been carefully set. It turned out it wasn't an ambush by the enemy, but a farewell gift from his own organization when they were used as a mobile lightning rod for a massive explosion. And unsurprisingly, the missile executed its delivery mission flawlessly. The ending couldn't be clearer. He was obliterated in that catastrophic explosion, which inadvertently handed him this surprise reincarnation ticket. The pain from the operating system update hadn't yet released Jean Quan, forcing him to find emergency shelter before running out of power on the road. In the agony, his eyes flashed with a strange blue light, signaling that the promotional power package was beginning to activate. Fortunately, ahead there was a house still lit, looking like a rescue station on this harsh survival map. With an entrance style that couldn't be more impressive, Jean Quan stepped in and immediately encountered the homeowner, a bulky guy with a rather unappealing haircut. Contrary to his shabby appearance, Jean Quan smiled confidently, making the bulky guy instinctively step back. He suddenly screamed in utmost pain, his body enveloped by a dark, evil aura, as if about to transform into a final boss. Immediately after, he lost control and charged in a frenzy, scaring a nearby boy into frozen stillness. The scene suddenly shifted to a flashback, revealing that the older brother of this boy, who was also the previous owner of the body Jean Quan was using, had an accident and fell into a sewer. Back in the present, the reluctant monster had been neatly dealt with by Jean Quan in just a few moves. The only thing left after the battle was a blood-stained metal card, probably evidence of the unfortunate person's identity. Just after cleaning up the mini-boss, Jean Quan began to examine the loot he had picked up, which looked like an important item. But the short-lived joy was interrupted by an uninvited guest wearing a skull mask that looked extremely friendly. It turned out this guest came with a group, and they quickly showed their attitude by calling our protagonist a rat. Without further words, the Skull faction immediately attacked with a purple energy weapon that looked pretty high-tech. Their goal was clear: silence the witness and steal the metal card that Jean Quan was holding. Jean Quan quickly fell into a disadvantage, silently cursing his luck, thinking how unlucky he was to encounter a death god right after escaping the King of Hell. The enemy struck mercilessly, stepping on him to fully suppress him. But just when he thought victory was assured, the skull-masked guy suddenly showed an expression of utter shock. It turned out all this time the protagonist had only been charging up to unleash his final move, a destructive attack that blew everything around away. After cleaning up the trash, Jean Quan left coldly, ending a tumultuous day since his rebirth. The scene shifted to some rooftop, where Jean Quan was performing dramatically like in an action movie, pulling out a metal box to intimidate someone. Meanwhile, underground, a mysterious character was trying to escape the sewer using a stick. It turned out the person Jean Quan was negotiating with was this character. He gallantly lifted the sewer cover and received a word of thanks. But the newly formed friendship quickly ended, as the girl who had just been rescued immediately turned and chased her savior with full enthusiasm. Jean Quan quickly landed and assumed a defensive stance, ready for an imminent, serious conversation. Just when tensions were at their peak, the pain from the side effects of reincarnation struck, causing him to lose vigilance. Seizing the golden opportunity, the girl approached from behind and pressed a cold gun to his neck. She began interrogating Jean Quan's identity, while he could only sigh and explain that he was just a passerby looking for shelter from the rain. Not believing him, she demanded he hand over the item, and Jean Quan cooperated to avoid unnecessary trouble. He calmly took out the metal card and handed it to the girl, temporarily ending this stormy introduction. After receiving the mission item, the blue-haired girl did not look happy. On the contrary, she seemed even sadder. It turned out the item was a memento of her deceased brother, bringing tears to her eyes as she remembered him. She began blaming and tormenting herself over her brother's sacrifice, while Jean Quan could only sit beside her as an unwilling witness. She cried bitterly, lamenting that the world was too cruel and she didn't know how to continue living without her brother. Jean Quan could only sigh in exasperation, not expecting that his reincarnation into a new world would bring him face to face with such familiar, desperate eyes. The girl's gaze touched something deep inside him, making the former Special Forces officer's eyes flash with determination. His memories returned to his past life, when he was a soldier and had witnessed countless refugees losing everything in war. Their faces then were marked with the same pain and emptiness as this girl's. They were women who had lost loved ones and struggled to survive after escaping the hells of war. And he realized a bitter truth. Those with such eyes no longer felt joy when rescued. They simply existed. Jean Quan's recollection ended with images of refugees stranded, having lost everything and with nowhere to turn. Returning to the present, it seemed the painful memory prompted Jean Quan to make a decision. He placed a hand on the girl's shoulder to comfort her. He offered to take the place of her brother to protect her like a mercenary, a proposition that sounded very cool. Expecting a touching moment, the girl instead coldly remarked that even if he was a good person, he was about to die. The evidence was his hand, showing signs of corrosion after being exposed to the rain of shadows earlier. She explained that this place was the Dead City, and this black rain was not ordinary acid rain, but a Pro-Max version. And the consequence for anyone standing in it for more than 180 minutes was being transformed into a horrifying zombie. Jean Quan finally understood why his body had been weakening. It was due to being affected by a debuff. He began a rapid-fire Q&A and was provided with a series of important information about this world by the girl, including the skull guys from before. Hearing concepts like mage or job bearer, Jean Quan was completely confused, showing that this world was vastly different from his homeland. The girl began her knowledge briefing for newcomers, explaining that it was the year 1000 of the Crystal Silver Era under the Eaglefly Empire. After hearing this, Jean Quan just smirked, officially confirming 100% that he had received a ticket to travel to a completely new world. He continued to ask about how to become a job bearer, and learned that the system here did not require exams, but only needed something called a badge. To illustrate, here was an image showing various job classes, from melee, mage to support, looking very diverse and fantastical. And the metal box from earlier was one of those badges, stolen by her brother to help her awaken her power. But the price was too high. Thinking that her brother would never return, she couldn't help but cry. The girl tormented herself with guilt, and seeing this, Jean Quan asked if she had any other family. The answer was predictable. Her brother was the only family she had in this world. Now, without her brother, this badge was her only path to survival in this harsh world. After hearing the whole story, Jean Quan could only sigh and tell himself that both of them were unfortunate souls toyed with by fate. As the two unfortunate souls shared a quiet moment, seemingly contemplating the future if they survived this ordeal. Boom! A loud explosion from outside cut their conversation short. The wall next to them collapsed, and no one else but the cool-faced skull guys had returned to reclaim their goods. In this life-and-death situation, the girl decided to go all in, needing to awaken her power immediately, or both would end up on the platter. She took out the badge and pressed it straight against her forehead, beginning the activation ritual. But a powerful energy blast threw her far away. It seemed the installation process had a serious error. The badge fell to the ground, glowing red, flatly rejecting its new owner. Jean Quan, somehow by some miraculous means, explained that rejection could only be due to incompatibility or lack of aptitude. Upon hearing this, the girl completely collapsed, feeling useless for turning her brother's sacrifice into vain. And of course, the villains did not miss this golden opportunity. They attacked while the two main characters were at their weakest. In the heat of the moment, a decisive step sounded, signaling that our protagonist was about to switch to serious mode. Meanwhile, the fake Death God squad wondered why their prey had suddenly stopped. The blue-haired girl had regained her composure, bluntly declaring there was no need to waste words on these guys. Receiving the signal, the skull guys rushed forward with the sole goal of reclaiming the badge. Jean Quan swiftly pushed the girl out of the danger zone, drawing all attention onto himself. Realizing she could not awaken, the girl made a bold decision. throwing the badge directly to Jin Quan. Without hesitation, our protagonist grabbed it and pressed the badge against his own forehead. A massive dark energy erupted from Jin Quan, accompanied by ancient runes. This was clearly an extremely spectacular transformation. A virtual notification appeared with the words, "Ding. Job change successful," confirming that Jin Quan had acquired new power. And here was the reward. A blazing sword full of might, the starter weapon for his new job. The process of installing the new job was reaching its final steps. Here were his detailed stats. Job, Night Demon Swordsman, level 0, but the skill set was all overpowered, especially the SSS tier super VIP talent. Jin Quan opened his eyes. They now emitted a radiant blue light, signaling that the rebirth was complete. He was amazed to see this world functioning like a video game, complete with a system panel. The blue-haired girl was utterly astonished. She hadn't expected the badge to fit Jin Quan so perfectly, turning him into a master in an instant. But the joy didn't last long. A seemingly bigger final boss appeared, questioning Jin Quan for using the badge without permission. Once the boss gave the order, the lackeys charged, and Jin Quan did not hesitate to swing his sword powerfully in response. The girl could only lie there stunned, completely overwhelmed by his new power. A green slash swept through, looking both beautiful and lethal, perfectly matching the protagonist's style. The two skull guys could only gape in shock. They couldn't believe that someone who was weak moments ago could become so strong so unrealistically. With new power in hand, Jin Quan wasted no time and immediately went to test the gear. He unleashed a slash full of dark energy, shouting a cool line worthy of a dominator. The skull guys realized the badge had a new owner and panicked, shouting at each other to stop him. But Jin Quan only responded with a sharp gaze and the words, "You overestimate yourselves." Without further words, he unleashed another attack with dark energy. The lackeys had no chance to resist. They could only scream in pain as his power swept through them. The blue-haired girl stood frozen for 5 seconds, unable to believe that a newbie who just awakened could be this strong. The battle ended as quickly as it began. Jin Quan landed in a pose that couldn't have been cooler. He was even more surprised to realize that the badge's power not only gave him strength, but also healed all injuries on his body. The survivors could only bitterly admit defeat under a newbie and would no longer have a chance to report back to their superiors. With a friendly, glowing gaze, Jin Quan asked the lackeys if they still intended to report. Without waiting for a reply, he swung his sword, declaring, "All of you will stay here." As a result, the entire group was wiped out, with no trace left. After cleaning up the battlefield, the girl reminded that they needed to escape quickly before anyone noticed. But the problem was that the only exit was up high, and they didn't seem to have the ability to fly. Fortunately, the blue-haired girl already had a plan. She pulled out a bundle of explosives and told Jin Quan to follow her. It turned out to be a timed bomb, an extremely gentle and subtle solution. A few seconds later, a massive explosion shook the earth, creating a new path. Jin Quan could not hide his surprise. It seemed the wall-breaking plan had succeeded beyond expectations. The girl happily led the way through the new path, showing him a staircase on the other side. After an hour of travel, they finally reached the blue-haired girl's secret base. She invited her reluctant mercenary guest inside. Inside was a mechanical workshop, a bit messy but still quite tidy. The girl told Jin Quan to sit and rest while she tidied up a bit. Jin Quan looked around and remarked that she must have worked very hard managing this shop alone. A rather strange detail was that her toolbox contained human bones. She sadly replied that there had been 2 working together before, but now she was alone. Realizing he had spoken out of turn, he quickly apologized, but the girl said she didn't mind. But the peaceful moment did not last long. A gruff visitor barged in, complaining about why the door was opened so late. The visitor's shadow loomed over both of them, signaling new trouble approaching. The uninvited guest turned out to be a lord, a title that alone suggested he was not to be trifled with. He asked the girl about a deal her brother had signed with him, but she seemed to know nothing. Noticing this, he smiled with malice, signaling something ominous. Without further delay, the lord ordered 2 henchmen to take the girl away. The 2 burly men quickly acted, holding onto the struggling girl, but a decisive step blocked their path, and no one else but Jin Quan, our mercenary, intervened. The lord turned back with a displeased face, clearly unhappy that someone dared to interfere. He glared at Jean Quan and asked who he was to have the audacity to meddle in his affairs. With glowing blue eyes, Jean Quan coldly replied, "What right do you have to take her?" The Lord arrogantly answered that he had the rights of a lord. Surprisingly, Jean Quan used his new skill to check profile and declared that this lord was not a bad person. Seeing an opportunity to negotiate, he directly asked, "What is the price for the girl?" The lord appeared interested and mentioned a place called Mine Number 1, and the specialty of this mine was giant worms that eat sand and looked extremely terrifying. The deal was made. Jean Quan had to enter and retrieve something the lord wanted, and he would return the girl. But first, the lord wanted to test if Jean Quan was capable enough to handle this task. True to his word, the lord charged at Jean Quan to test his skills.